I'm Eleanor, 29 years old, and until last month, I thought I was the future of Sweet Traditions, our family bakery chain built over 3 generations. Then I found a document on my father's desk that shattered everything. My parents had secretly transferred 90% ownership to my younger sister, Allison. The sister who never cared about the business. The betrayal felt like a knife to my heart. If you're watching, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, hit subscribe, and join me as I share how this family betrayal became my unexpected blessing. Some of my earliest memories are of standing on a step stool in our original bakery location, my tiny hands covered in flour as my grandmother taught me how to knead dough. I was only 5 years old, but I can still remember the way she smiled when I got it right, and how the sweet scent of vanilla and cinnamon filled the air. "You have the touch, Eleanor," she'd say, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "This bakery will be yours someday." By the time I was 12, I was spending every weekend and summer vacation working at Sweet Traditions. While other kids were at the mall or swimming pools, I was learning how to decorate cakes, manage inventory, and handle the register. My parents, Martha and Richard, had expanded from one small storefront to 3 thriving locations across our city. They were hardworking, traditional people who believed in family legacy and paying your dues. My sister Allison is 4 years younger than me, and from the beginning, it seemed like we lived in different worlds. While I was up at 5 a.m. to help with the morning baking before school, Allison was allowed to sleep in. When I had to cancel plans with friends because we were short-staffed, Allison was dropped off at her dance recitals or soccer games without question. "Your sister needs these activities for college applications," my mother would explain when I complained about the double standard. "You have the business." The unspoken agreement was always clear. I was being groomed to take over Sweet Traditions. I accepted the responsibility with pride, choosing a business major in college specifically to bring new skills back to our family enterprise. While my classmates accepted jobs at prestigious firms in bigger cities, I returned home immediately after graduation. My starting salary was modest. My father insisted I needed to earn my place despite my degree, but I didn't mind. I was investing in my future. Within 2 years, I had modernized our operations completely. I built our first website with online ordering capabilities, established our social media presence, and introduced new product lines that appealed to younger customers without alienating our loyal base. Sweet Traditions expanded to 5 locations under my marketing strategies, and our profits increased by 35%. I was working 60 to 70-hour weeks, sacrificing dating and friendships for the business. My apartment was just a place to sleep between shifts. But it all seemed worth it when Dad would put his arm around my shoulders and say things like, "One day, all this hard work will pay off when you're running the show." Mom would add, "Sweet Traditions wouldn't be what it is today without you, Eleanor." Looking back, I should have noticed the signs earlier. About a year ago, my parents started having closed-door meetings that I wasn't invited to. Financial documents that had always been open for my review suddenly required passwords. And most puzzling, Allison, who had pursued a marketing career in digital media with no interest in baking, suddenly started showing up at the main bakery, asking questions about operations and profitability. "Just trying to understand the family business better," she'd say with a shrug when I asked about her newfound interest. "Is that a crime?" I tried to include her, genuinely believing her involvement could be positive. Maybe she could contribute her digital marketing expertise while I handled operations and product development. I even invited her to management meetings and shared our 5-year expansion plan with her. "This is really impressive work, Ellie," she said, using the nickname I'd always hated. "But don't you think it's a little safe? We could be doing so much more with the brand." That was Allison, always seeing the flashy possibilities without understanding the foundation that made them possible. Still, I defended her to our managers when they questioned her sudden appearance in decision-making meetings. "She's family," I'd say, "and fresh perspectives can be valuable." I had no idea that while I was championing my sister's inclusion, a very different conversation was happening behind those closed doors, one that would blindside me completely and change the course of my life. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my world collapsed. I was searching for the quarterly financial reports in my father's office while he and my mother were at a vendor meeting. The manila folder I needed wasn't in its usual filing cabinet, so I checked Dad's desk drawers. That's when I found a thick legal document with a heading, Transfer of Ownership, Sweet Traditions Bakery, LLC. My heart started racing as I flipped through the pages, certain there must be some mistake. But there it was in black and white, a complete restructuring of the family business that gave Allison 90% ownership. I was allocated a mere 10% in recognition of past contributions. The document was dated 3 months earlier and signed by both my parents and Allison. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the papers. The room seemed to tilt sideways as tears blurred my vision. 3 generations of family history, 15 years of my personal sacrifice, countless missed holidays and weekends, all of it culminating in this betrayal. I felt physically ill, my stomach churning with a toxic mix of shock and heartbreak. I was still sitting there, documents spread across the desk, when my parents and Allison returned from their meeting. They froze in the doorway when they saw what I was reading. "Eleanor," my mother began, her voice unnaturally high. "We were going to discuss this with you. We just needed to find the right time." "The right time?" My voice was barely a whisper. "When would that be? After another decade of working myself to the bone for a business you never intended to let me lead." "It's not like that," my father said, entering the room with his hands raised as if approaching a frightened animal. "We made this decision for the good of the family and the business."
How?
I stood up, steadying myself against the desk. How is giving nearly everything to someone who has contributed nothing good for the business? Allison stepped forward, arms crossed. "That's not fair, Eleanor. Just because I didn't want to spend my entire life covered in flour doesn't mean I can't run this company. I have actual corporate experience and connections you don't have." "We're not getting any younger," my father interjected. "We needed to think about stability. Allison has a husband. They're planning for children. You've always been so independent, focused on your career. We thought." "You thought what?" The initial shock was burning away, replaced by white-hot anger. That I was too dedicated to the business to deserve owning it? That my sister deserved a reward for avoiding responsibility her entire life? "Don't be dramatic," my mother sighed. "You're still getting 10%. That's a significant inheritance." Inheritance. I laughed bitterly. "This isn't an inheritance. This is payment for services rendered. You're treating me like a long-term employee getting a retirement package, not your daughter, who has dedicated her life to this business." "See, this is exactly why we worried about leaving it to you," Allison said with a dismissive wave. "You're too emotional about everything. Business decisions need to be practical." Practical? I was shouting now, years of repressed frustration erupting. Was it practical to let me believe this would be mine someday? To let me turn down job offers that would have launched my career elsewhere? To pay me barely above manager wages while I increased profits by double digits year after year? "You should be grateful for what you're getting," Allison snapped. "Most people don't get handed anything in life." Something inside me broke at those words. The audacity of her statement, that I was being handed something rather than having earned it through years of sacrifice, was too much to bear. Grateful? To whom? To you, who's never frosted a cupcake or balanced a budget? Or to our parents, who apparently value your future more than the years I've already given them? Tears were streaming down my face now. This business was supposed to be my life's work, and you've turned it into a family charity case for Allison. I grabbed my purse and pushed past them, ignoring my father calling my name. I drove aimlessly through town, vision blurred with tears, finally pulling into the parking lot of a park where I used to play as a child. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely dial my phone, but I needed to talk to someone who wasn't family. Rebecca answered on the second ring. We'd been friends since college, and she'd often criticized how much I sacrificed for sweet traditions. "They're taking advantage of you," she'd warned more than once. "Can I come over?" I managed to ask through my tears. "I can't go home right now." 20 minutes later, I was sitting on Rebecca's couch, a glass of wine in my trembling hands as I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly outraged. "This is beyond unfair," she finally said. "It's exploitation. They've used your loyalty against you." I checked my phone to find 15 missed calls and twice as many text messages from my parents, but nothing from Allison.
Typical.
Rebecca insisted I take her spare bedroom for the night, and I gratefully accepted. I couldn't face my family yet, not when the wound was still so raw. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I wondered how I could possibly walk back into sweet traditions tomorrow and pretend everything was normal. But what choice did I have? Despite everything, the bakery was still my life's work. I just didn't know if it could still be my future. The next morning, I arrived at our flagship bakery with puffy eyes hidden behind sunglasses and a determination to maintain my dignity. The staff sensed something was wrong immediately. Our head baker, Teresa, asked if I was feeling ill, and our front counter manager, Jason, kept shooting concerned glances my way. I forced a smile and blamed allergies, but the tension was palpable when my parents and Allison arrived an hour later. We moved around each other like awkward dancers, overly polite in front of employees, but avoiding direct conversation. I buried myself in work, checking inventory, and revising next month's schedule with mechanical efficiency. But inside, I was crumbling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying childhood memories with new, painful clarity. The time my parents missed my high school honors ceremony because Allison had a minor cold. The Christmas I received practical gifts like business books while Allison unwrapped expensive jewelry. The countless times my achievements were acknowledged with brief nods while Allison's smallest accomplishments warranted celebrations. Had I imagined my special connection to the business? Had my grandmother's words about the bakery being mine someday been just empty promises? Perhaps worst of all, had I wasted the most productive years of my life on a future that was never meant for me? Days turned into weeks, and my mental state deteriorated rapidly. I lost my appetite, dropping 7 pounds in 10 days. Dark circles appeared under my eyes from consecutive nights of insomnia. I started making small mistakes, forgetting to order ingredients, missing meetings with suppliers. Each error felt like confirmation that perhaps my parents were right not to trust me with the business. After 2 weeks of this painful limbo, my parents invited me to dinner at their house to discuss the situation. I accepted, hoping against hope that they'd reconsidered, that they'd realized the injustice of their decision. Instead, they presented me with what they called a generous compensation package, a one-time payment that amounted to less than 2 years of a proper executive salary. "This is in addition to your 10% ownership," my father explained, sliding the paperwork across the dining table we'd shared hundreds of family meals at. "We want to be fair, Eleanor." "Fair would have been telling me the truth years ago," I said quietly. "Fair would have been letting me build my career somewhere else if you never intended for me to lead this business." "You're still acting like we owe you something," Allison interjected from across the table. She'd been surprisingly quiet until now. "Mom and Dad built this business. It's theirs to distribute however they want. And I've spent my entire adult life helping them expand it," I countered, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "I turned down a job at Murray Consulting that would have paid 3 times what I make now because Dad said, and I quote, 'Why build someone else's dream when you can build your own?' That was before we realized Allison had such a talent for business strategy," my mother said, not meeting my eyes. "Her experience with digital companies brings valuable perspective." "Experience?" I laughed incredulously. "She's worked for 4 different companies in 5 years. Meanwhile, I've been consistently growing our brand for nearly a decade. That's called diversifying my experience," Allison shot back. "Not everyone wants to be stuck in the same place forever. Maybe if you tried branching out, you have more to offer than just knowing how to run the same bakeries the same way year after year." The conversation devolved from there, with deeper wounds inflicted on both sides. I left feeling worse than before, the paltry check they'd offered still sitting untouched on their dining table. The compromise had only made it clearer that they didn't understand, or didn't care about, how deeply their betrayal cut. Back at work, the situation continued to deteriorate. Decisions I would normally make independently were now brought to group meetings where Allison increasingly dominated the conversation. She began contradicting my directions to staff, creating confusion about who was actually in charge. "We're going to pause the fall menu development Eleanor mentioned," she announced during one particularly painful meeting. "I've been researching market trends, and I think we need to go in a completely different direction." Never mind that I'd already ordered specialty ingredients and had our bakers testing recipes for weeks. Never mind that our customers looked forward to our seasonal offerings every year. Allison had decided, and our parents backed her without question. Most hurtful was watching her take credit for systems I had implemented years before. During a meeting with a potential new supplier, she confidently explained her inventory management system, the very one I had created during my final year of college and refined over time. "Eleanor helped implement it, of course," she added with a patronizing smile in my direction. "She's been such a dedicated employee." Employee. Not co-owner, not future leader. Employee. Each day brought new indignities, new evidence that my role was being systematically diminished while Allison was elevated. And through it all, I had to maintain a professional demeanor, swallowing my pride and pain for the sake of the business I still loved despite everything. 3 weeks after discovering the ownership transfer, I reached my breaking point. I was in my office reviewing applications for a new assistant baker when I overheard Allison's voice drifting in from the hallway. She was speaking to Teresa and Jason, our most senior staff members. "Between us, I know things have been a bit chaotic lately," she was saying in a conspiratorial tone. "But I want you both to know I'm committed to fixing the mess Eleanor's made of our expansion plans. She means well, but she's been too conservative with the brand." I felt the blood drain from my face. The mess she was referring to was a carefully researched, financially sound growth strategy that had already secured favorable lease terms for 2 new locations. The staff knew this. They'd been part of the planning process for months. Before I could decide whether to confront her, the situation escalated. Later that same afternoon, during our weekly staff meeting, I was explaining updated procedures for our custom order system when Allison interrupted. "Actually, we're going to handle custom orders differently moving forward," she announced, not even looking in my direction. "The current system is too labor-intensive and cuts into our profit margins." I felt 20 pairs of eyes swing between us, witnessing my humiliation. "Allison, we haven't discussed any changes to the custom order system," I said evenly, trying to maintain professionalism. "It's been extremely successful and accounts for 20% of our revenue." "Well, I've discussed it with Mom and Dad," she replied with a dismissive wave. "They agree with my assessment." I looked to my parents, expecting at least one of them to acknowledge that this was the first I was hearing of such a significant operational change. Instead, my father cleared his throat awkwardly. "Allison has done some compelling analysis on our profit centers," he said. "We think her approach might streamline operations." In that moment, something inside me snapped. Not with a dramatic outburst, but with a quiet, final acceptance that my position was untenable. This wasn't just about ownership percentages anymore. It was about respect, recognition, and basic professional courtesy, none of which I was receiving. "I see," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "In that case, I'll let Allison finish conducting the meeting." I stood up, gathered my notebook and pen, and walked out of the conference room with as much dignity as I could muster. Back in my office, I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. The decision I'd been avoiding for weeks crystallized with sudden clarity. I couldn't continue working at Sweet Traditions under these conditions. With methodical calm, I began packing my personal belongings. Family photos came down from the walls, reference books from the shelves, the special apron my grandmother had embroidered for my 16th birthday from its hook behind the door. 15 years of my life fit into 2 cardboard boxes. A soft knock interrupted my packing. Jessica, one of our younger bakers who I'd personally hired and mentored, stood in the doorway, her expression concerned. "Are you leaving?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I answered simply. "It's time for me to go." We're all confused about what's happening, she confessed. Everyone knows how much you've done for Sweet Traditions. It doesn't make sense that your sister is suddenly in charge. Her loyalty touched me, but I wouldn't drag staff into family politics. Sometimes business decisions don't make sense from the outside, I said carefully. But change can be good. For everyone. Including me, I added silently. Jessica helped me carry my boxes to the car. As we loaded them into the trunk, she slipped me a piece of paper. My personal number, she explained. In case you need anything. Or start something new. I nodded, too emotional to speak. As I prepared to leave, my parents and Allison emerged from the building, clearly alerted to my departure. Eleanor, don't be ridiculous, my mother called. We can work through this. I turned to face my family one last time in the parking lot of the business I helped build. There's nothing to work through, I said calmly. You've made your decision about the future of Sweet Traditions, and I've made mine about my place in it. I wish you all the best. You're just going to walk away? Allison asked incredulously. After all the opportunities you've been given? The irony of her statement was almost laughable. Goodbye, Allison. I hope you appreciate what you've been given more than you think I have. With that, I got into my car and drove away from Sweet Traditions for what I believed was the last time. The week that followed was the darkest period of my life. I barely left my apartment, ignoring calls from everyone except Rebecca, who brought groceries and refused to let me completely isolate myself. I slept at odd hours, waking from dreams where I was back at the bakery, only to remember, with crushing clarity, that chapter of my life was over. What am I supposed to do now? I asked Rebecca during one particularly low moment. I've invested everything in a future that doesn't exist anymore. You invested in skills and experience that can't be taken away from you, she countered firmly. Your parents may own the bakeries, but they don't own your talent or knowledge. I wanted to believe her, but the weight of lost years and broken trust felt overwhelming. Had I wasted my 20s on a family that didn't value my contribution? Was I back at square one professionally at 29? Then came the call that would ultimately change everything. Cameron, who supplied the specialty flours for our artisanal bread line, rang my cell phone on day 6 of my self-imposed exile. Eleanor, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you at Sweet Traditions all week. We need to finalize the order for that heritage grain blend you wanted to try. I took a deep breath. I'm not with Sweet Traditions anymore, Cameron. Family reorganization. My sister Allison is handling purchasing now. There was a long pause before he responded. Your sister? The one who called our organic certification overpriced marketing fluff last year. Despite everything, I had to suppress a laugh. That's the one. Well, that's disappointing, he said frankly. You were the main reason we valued Sweet Traditions business. Your understanding of quality ingredients made working with you worthwhile, even when your orders were smaller than some of our other clients. His words hit me like a revelation. Really? Absolutely. In fact, several of us suppliers were just talking about you at the food industry mixer last month. Martin from Valley Dairy specifically mentioned how your detailed feedback helped them improve their cultured butter. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't just family obligation that had defined my professional identity. I had built real relationships and earned genuine respect in the industry. That means a lot to hear, Cameron. Thank you. So, what's next for you? He asked. Because wherever you go, I'd like to keep supplying your ingredients. His question hung in the air, demanding an answer I didn't yet have. But somehow, the fact that he assumed there would be a next for me professionally, that my career didn't begin and end with Sweet Traditions, sparked something crucial inside me. What if this betrayal wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning of a new chapter? Cameron's call was the catalyst I needed. After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the calendar where I'd marked Sweet Traditions events for months in advance, events I would no longer attend. The empty squares suddenly looked less like voids and more like possibilities. My entire identity had been wrapped up in being the heir to Sweet Traditions. Without that future, who was I? The answer came with unexpected clarity. I was still Eleanor, a skilled baker with business acumen, industry connections, and a passion for creating memorable food experiences. The only thing I'd lost was the predetermined path. For the first time since discovering the ownership transfer, I felt a surge of something that wasn't anger or grief. It was excitement. Tentative at first, then growing stronger. What if this forced departure was actually an opportunity? I called Rebecca immediately. I need to borrow your laptop. Mine is still synced to the Sweet Traditions accounts, and I need a clean start. 2 hours later, I was researching non-compete clauses and business formation options. By evening, I had an appointment with Michelle, a small business attorney Rebecca had worked with previously. Based on what you've described, you're in a surprisingly good position, Michelle told me the next day, reviewing my employment history with Sweet Traditions. There was never a formal employment contract with non-compete provisions, and your parents paid you as a regular employee rather than establishing you as an officer of the company. Is that good? I asked, still learning this new legal terminology. Very good. It means you're free to start your own bakery business, even in the same city. The only restriction would be using proprietary recipes that could be considered trade secrets of Sweet Traditions. I smiled for the first time in weeks. That's not a problem. I've been developing my own recipes for years, ideas my family considered too experimental for our traditional bakery. With legal concerns addressed, I threw myself into market research. Sweet Traditions had cornered the market on classic American baked goods, cookies, pies, birthday cakes. But there was a noticeable gap in our city for artisanal international pastries and bread. The growing international population and increasingly sophisticated food scene created perfect conditions for something new. I spent days visiting different neighborhoods, evaluating potential locations. The emerging arts district caught my attention. Rent was still reasonable, foot traffic was increasing with each new gallery opening, and the demographic skewed toward food-conscious professionals and creative types who would appreciate unique offerings. An available storefront on Maple Street particularly spoke to me. The previous tenant had been a bookstore, and the space retained character with exposed brick walls and original hardwood floors. It was smaller than any Sweet Traditions location, but that meant lower overhead while I established myself. As I built my business plan, I reconnected with people from my past who might support this new venture. Former classmates from my brief stint at culinary school before college. Vendors and suppliers who had expressed appreciation for my approach to quality. Even my old professor, Thompson, who taught entrepreneurship and had always encouraged me to think beyond the family business. This business plan is solid, Eleanor, Professor Thompson said after reviewing my projections. You've identified a clear market opportunity and your experience gives you credibility. Have you thought about funding? That was the biggest hurdle. My savings were modest. My parents had always justified my below-market salary by emphasizing my future inheritance of the business. I qualified for a small business loan, but it wouldn't cover all the necessary startup costs. I might know someone who could help, Thompson offered. A former student who invests in food businesses. He's particularly interested in concepts that bring international influences to smaller markets. That introduction led to a meeting with Alexander, a successful restaurateur turned investor. He grilled me extensively about my vision, examined my recipes and sample menu, and questioned my production capabilities. After 3 hours, he leaned back in his chair with a decisive nod. I'm in. 25% equity for the startup capital you need. I'll be a silent partner. This is your show to run. His confidence in me was the final validation I needed. This wasn't just a reaction to my family's betrayal anymore. It was a viable business opportunity that an experienced investor believed in. The most delicate phase of my plan involved reconnecting with certain Sweet Traditions employees. I was careful not to actively recruit anyone, but when Jessica texted asking about my plans, I was honest about my new venture. She immediately expressed interest in joining me, along with 2 other staff members who had become increasingly frustrated with the changing atmosphere under Allison's leadership. The place isn't the same without you, Jessica confessed during our coffee meeting. Your sister doesn't understand that a bakery isn't just about profit margins and brand expansion. It's about creating something special every day. With my core team forming and financing secured, I threw myself into developing signature recipes that would differentiate my new bakery from Sweet Traditions and every other option in town. French canellis with a hint of local bourbon. Japanese milk bread with seasonal fruit fillings. Italian olive oil cake with rosemary and orange. Each creation represented both my technical skill and the global perspective my family had always resisted. As pieces of my new future fell into place, I felt increasingly liberated from the shadow of Sweet Traditions. This wasn't just a consolation prize or a rebound. It was the business I would have created if I'd been free to follow my own vision from the beginning. 1 month after walking out of Sweet Traditions, I signed the lease on the Maple Street storefront and officially registered Flour and Fable Bakery LLC. The name represented both the craft of baking and the stories behind each global recipe we would feature. It was, at last, truly mine. With the lease signed and business registered, I knew I needed to formally sever my remaining ties with Sweet Traditions. I drafted a professional resignation letter, explicitly relinquishing my 10% ownership stake in exchange for being released from any potential future claims. Michelle reviewed it carefully before I delivered it in person to my parents' home. My father answered the door, surprise evident on his face. "Eleanor, we've been worried about you." "I'm fine, Dad." "Better than fine, actually," I said, maintaining a calm I wouldn't have thought possible weeks earlier. "I've come to give you this." He scanned the letter, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "You're giving up your ownership share?" "Eleanor, that's worth significant money, especially as the business continues to grow." "I'm aware of its monetary value," I replied. "But I've realized there are some things more valuable than money, like building something that truly reflects my vision and values." My mother appeared in the hallway behind him, with Allison hovering nearby. "What's happening?" my mother asked. "Eleanor is refusing her ownership stake," my father explained, his voice tight. Allison stepped forward, arms crossed defensively. "So you're just abandoning the family business completely? That's pretty drastic, don't you think?" "I'm not abandoning anything," I corrected her. "I'm choosing a different path, one where my contributions are valued and my voice is heard." "And what path is that?" my mother asked. "I'm opening my own bakery. Flour and Fable will focus on artisanal international pastries and bread, nothing that directly competes with Sweet Traditions' core offerings." The shock on their faces might have been satisfying under different circumstances. Instead, I felt only a calm certainty that I was making the right decision. "You can't just start a competing business," Allison sputtered. That's completely legal," I finished for her. "I've consulted an attorney. Since I never signed a non-compete agreement and I'll be creating original recipes, there are no legal obstacles." My father studied me with new eyes, perhaps seeing for the first time the businesswoman I'd become rather than just his daughter. "You've thought this through carefully." "I have. The paperwork includes my formal resignation, effective immediately. I've already emptied my office, so there's no need for me to return to the bakery." After a tense goodbye, I walked to my car feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of unmet expectations and family obligation had lifted, replaced by the exhilarating responsibility of creating something entirely my own. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The Maple Street storefront required significant renovation to transform from a bookstore into a working bakery. I collaborated with my friend Daniel, an architect who specialized in repurposing historic spaces, to design a layout that preserved the building's character while meeting commercial kitchen requirements. "The exposed brick wall should stay visible from the customer area," Daniel suggested during our planning session. "It gives the space warmth and authenticity, values I know you want your brand to embody." We designed an open concept where customers could see some of the baking process, reinforcing the artisanal nature of our products. The front featured a curved display case showcasing our daily offerings, with comfortable seating in the former reading nooks of the bookstore. Every detail required decisions, often constrained by our limited budget. Commercial ovens represented the largest expense, non-negotiable for maintaining product quality. But for other elements, we got creative. Repurposed library card catalogs became storage for smaller baking tools. Old wooden ladders from the bookstore were transformed into overhead lighting fixtures. Throughout the construction process, challenges arose almost daily. Our plumbing contractor discovered issues that required unexpected repairs, eating into our contingency budget. The specialized ventilation system for the ovens was backordered, threatening our timeline. And most concerning, our primary flour supplier suddenly backed out after receiving a large order from a new client, Sweet Traditions. "I'm really sorry, Eleanor," Cameron said when he called with the news. "They've suddenly doubled their usual order and signed an exclusivity agreement. I can't afford to turn down that volume of business." I couldn't prove Allison was deliberately interfering, but the timing seemed suspicious. Rather than wallow in frustration, I pivoted, connecting with a smaller mill 2 hours outside the city that produced even higher quality, stone-ground flours. Their limited production capacity had made them impractical for Sweet Traditions volume, but they were perfect for my more specialized approach. "We'd be honored to supply flour and fable," the mill owner told me after tasting sample pastries made with their flour. "Your approach to baking aligns perfectly with our philosophy about preserving traditional milling methods." This pattern repeated itself several times. An obstacle would appear, often seemingly connected to my family's influence, but each workaround ultimately led to better partnerships and products. When a local food blogger mentioned hearing rumors about unreliable quality at my yet unopened bakery, I invited her for a private tasting that resulted in an enthusiastic preview article. Through it all, I received text messages from my parents ranging from expressions of concern to thinly veiled attempts to discourage me. The restaurant failure rate in the first year is over 60%. "We just don't want to see you hurt. The economy is showing signs of downturn. This is a risky time to start a luxury food business. We could find a place for you at Sweet Traditions if you reconsider. Families should stick together." I responded politely but firmly each time, maintaining boundaries while leaving the door open for a healthier relationship in the future. Allison never contacted me directly, though I occasionally heard through mutual connections that she was dismissive of my little hobby bakery in public settings. Despite the challenges, progress continued. Jessica and the 2 other former Sweet Traditions employees joined me full-time as we entered the final preparation phase. We spent long nights testing recipes, adjusting formulations for our new equipment, and developing the distinctive presentation style that would set our products apart visually. After 3 months of intensive work, we were ready for a soft opening. We invited friends, supportive industry contacts, and neighboring business owners for a preview evening, offering samples of our signature items and tours of the new space. The response exceeded my most optimistic expectations. People lingered, asking detailed questions about ingredients and techniques. The owner of the art gallery across the street immediately placed a standing order for pastries for their weekend openings. A local coffee roaster proposed a cross-promotion featuring our pastries paired with their single-origin beans. Most meaningful was the food writer from the City magazine, who pulled me aside as the event was winding down. "I've covered every bakery opening in this city for 15 years, she told me, "and I've never seen products this innovative yet perfectly executed. You've created something special here, Eleanor." Her subsequent write-up described Flour and Fable as a paradigm shift in the local bakery scene and predicted we would quickly become a destination for serious food lovers. The article appeared 3 days before our grand opening, generating exactly the buzz we needed. The morning of our official first day, I arrived at 4 a.m. to begin baking, my stomach fluttering with a mixture of nerves and excitement. This was it, the moment my new vision would be tested in the real marketplace. As the sun rose, illuminating our freshly painted sign, I took a moment to absorb the significance of what I'd accomplished in just 4 months since that devastating discovery in my father's office. Sweet Traditions had never truly been mine. But Flour and Fable? It was mine in every way that mattered. I expected a decent turnout for our grand opening, but nothing prepared me for the line that stretched around the block before we even unlocked the doors. The Food magazine article had clearly struck a chord, and social media buzz from our soft opening had amplified interest beyond my wildest expectations. Jessica stood beside me at the counter, eyes wide. Are you ready for this? I took a deep breath, straightened my custom apron embroidered with the flower and Fable logo, and nodded. Let's make some magic happen. The day passed in a blur of transactions, conversations, and continuous baking to replenish our rapidly emptying display cases. Our Japanese milk bread sold out within the first 2 hours. The French canellas became an unexpected hit, with customers ordering them by the dozen. By afternoon, local food bloggers were posting photos and reviews, creating a virtual tour of our menu that drove even more traffic. Around 2 o'clock, I was explaining the inspiration behind our cardamom-spiced Finnish pulla bread to a customer when the front door chimed. I looked up to see my parents standing awkwardly near the entrance, taking in the bustling scene with expressions I couldn't quite read. "Excuse me a moment," I told the customer before approaching them.
"Mom, Dad.
"This is a surprise. We read about your opening in the magazine," my mother said, her eyes darting around the crowded space. "It seems to be going well." "Very well," I confirmed, maintaining a professional demeanor despite the emotional complexity of their presence. "Would you like to try something? The almond croissants have been particularly popular." My father cleared his throat. "Eleanor, we didn't just come to sample the pastries. We wanted to see you, and to say that perhaps we underestimated your vision for what a bakery could be." It wasn't quite an apology, but for my proud father, it was significant. "Thank you for coming," I said simply. "It means a lot that you're here." "This is very different from Sweet Traditions," my mother observed, gesturing toward our open kitchen and the globally inspired menu written on reclaimed wood panels. "It's very you." "That's the highest compliment you could give me," I replied with genuine warmth. The hurt wasn't gone, but seeing them make this gesture opened a door I thought might remain closed forever. They stayed for coffee and pastries, awkwardly but sincerely complimenting each item they tasted. As they prepared to leave, my father asked, "Have you heard from your sister?"
"No, y en suara tu nasli."
But I didn't expect to. My mother looked troubled. "She should see what you've created here." "Maybe someday," I said, not wanting to dwell on Allison's absence when there was so much to celebrate. "I should get back to work. Thank you both for coming." After they left, I checked my phone to find a text from Allison. "Heard Mom and Dad visited your place. Hope they didn't give you false hope about the family business. Your little bakery looks cute though." I smiled and put the phone away without responding. Her passive-aggressive message couldn't touch me anymore. I was no longer defining my success in relation to Sweet Traditions or seeking Allison's approval. The grand opening day ended with nearly everything sold out and a reservation list already forming for special orders. As I locked the door behind the last customer, my small team gathered for an impromptu celebration with leftover champagne from the morning toast. To Eleanor, Jessica raised her paper cup. "For showing us all that sometimes the best thing that can happen is not getting what you thought you wanted." 6 months after our opening, Flower and Fable had exceeded every projection in my business plan. We had a loyal customer base, standing orders from several high-end restaurants for our specialty breads, and a waiting list for our weekend baking workshops. Most importantly, I had achieved a work-life balance that had been impossible during my Sweet Traditions years. The Regional Culinary Association recognized our innovation with their New Establishment Award, specifically citing our commitment to blending global techniques with local ingredients. Standing on stage accepting the award, I spotted my parents in the audience, applauding with genuine pride. Our relationship had slowly begun to heal, though certain topics remained sensitive. They visited the bakery occasionally, always marveling at the constantly evolving menu. My father even admitted that some of our approaches to business operations were more efficient than the systems at Sweet Traditions. Allison and I maintained a cordial but distant relationship, exchanging brief greetings at family gatherings but little more. I heard through industry channels that Sweet Traditions was struggling somewhat with consistency issues and staff turnover, but I took no pleasure in those reports. The bakery still represented my family's legacy and the foundation of my own skills. As for me, I was already scouting locations for a second Flower and Fable location, this one focused on artisanal bread and education. The journey that had begun with betrayal had led to a place of greater authenticity and fulfillment than I could have imagined. Looking back on that devastating day in my father's office, I now recognize it as the painful but necessary catalyst for growth. Had I inherited sweet traditions as planned, I would have spent my career maintaining someone else's vision rather than creating my own. The business that was meant to be my security became my limitation, and losing it became my liberation. I learned that sometimes the greatest gift is not getting what you've been promised, but being forced to discover what you truly want. I learned that personal value isn't determined by family recognition, but by the impact you have on your community and industry. Most importantly, I learned that building something authentic to your own vision brings a satisfaction that inheriting someone else's dream never could. As I prepare to close the bakery after another successful day, I can't help reflecting on how differently things turned out than I had planned. The path I would have chosen for myself wasn't the path I needed. Sometimes the deepest wounds lead to the most profound healing, and the most painful endings make way for the most beautiful beginnings. What about you? Have you ever had a painful setback that ultimately led you to something better? Or are you facing a situation now where you need to reinvent yourself? Drop a comment below to share your experience. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories of resilience and reinvention, and give this video a like if it resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the best chapter of your story is the one you never planned to write. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to create your own path when the one you expected disappears.